What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Warren. I am a banker here in London and a property investor across the UK. My goal is to live free and independently from property, so I'm looking for an income of £3,000 per month from property. If that's what you're into, like, subscribe. That is what my channel is all about. So we are continuing the theme of millennials and Gen Zs being able to afford property in the UK. Today I'm reacting to a video from GB News once again. They seem to talk a lot about property and young people's affordability. And we're talking about how can young people in the UK afford to buy a home. Let's get straight into it.
Just give us the perspective from your generation.
Well, not only am I a priced out buyer, Liam, but I also grew up as a young carer. So there is absolutely nobody that wants to see social care properly funded more than I do. But there is just no way that it's fair to ask young people to give up more of their income to protect the housing wealth of older people, when young people know that a lot of us are never going to buy a home. Resolution Foundation research suggests that a third of millennials will be renting from the cradle to the grave. 60% of private renters have absolutely no savings whatsoever. You know, there are not 250,000 households a year ready, willing and able to buy homes at current unaffordable prices. We're not going to be able to fix this crisis by relying on unaffordable market homes. We're not going to be able to fix this crisis through measures like Help to Buy, which just get a few more households into home ownership while boosting prices and making things less affordable for the next lot of rent.
I'm with her so far, 100%. First of all, the affordability part, absolutely true. Affordability was much more achievable and easier for our grandparents and our parents' generation. You could have an average job with an average salary or below average even and still afford to buy a house. Just not the case now, especially as you come down south towards London and areas like that. And even more on the money, she hit a point when it comes to affordability of properties in the UK. She talked about it won't be fixed by Help to Buy and schemes like that. Help to Buy scheme is the Help to Build scheme. What it actually does is help builders build homes, right? And then they can charge a premium for those properties. So you still have to be on a fairly decent wage to be able to afford a Help to Buy home, okay? So she's really right about that.
That come along, we're going to need to do something different. And there is one tried and tested method that we know works for this problem, and that is building social housing. We build homes at prices that we know people can afford, at rents that we know allow people to save, with good quality, at a decent standard. We fix the housing crisis that way. In the 1970s, there was no housing shortage. We've cracked it because multiple governments of both stripes had built enough housing. And they did that by building lots and lots of social housing because it's free from market forces.
Council housing, some people call it, or housing associations providing subsidised rented accommodation for low-income households.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't rely on mortgage demand. It doesn't rely on people having enough savings. It relies on government borrowing at historically low interest rates and providing the homes that we know that people need. And the really beautiful thing about it, from a Conservative government's point of view, is that you can build millions of social homes and it will do barely anything to market prices.
The thing is, though, she said that it's, you know, obviously in the past been funded by government borrowing. What she might not know, but what I know, is that basically for the last 15 years, really emanating since the 2008 crash, the government has borrowed up to its eyeballs. It is drowning in debt, okay? We've had quantitative easing in the hundreds of billions to help us with stuff like COVID, the furlough scheme, Brexit, the last economic crash, getting people back to work. They gave a load of money to banks, you know, when they bailed them out in 2008. That money has gone elsewhere, right? The NHS is another one. Even though the NHS is underfunded, stuff like that, yeah, where a lot of money has been printed and gone historically. Housing really is not a priority of this government. Hence, stuff like the Help to Buy scheme, they're really relying on developers to build the houses for them, and they can't do it at a fast enough rate.
So given that this government is really concerned to protect house prices, and that's understandable because that is, you know, that's people's pensions, that's people's social care fund, that's people's wealth.
Voters' Wonga.
Absolutely. If we're not willing to take action to bring down house prices, then the least we can do, the only thing we can do indeed, is to build homes with price controls pegged to local incomes that people can actually afford.
Okay, let's turn to Ray Bolger before we go to Bob Seeley for a view from Westminster. Ray, there's three, if I may say so, old geezers in this debate today, and there's one young woman representing her generation. You have huge experience in the British housing market. You've watched the market for many, many years. We've just seen figures from the Halifax showing another record high I mean, the reality is that house prices, they are going to keep going up, aren't they? They are going to continue to become increasingly unaffordable for, frankly, people.
By the way, he's talking about houses prices going up and reaching a record high. This video is a year ago where the market was doing that, especially with the after effects of COVID. The whole Kwasi-Kwarteng and Liz Truss announcement and subsequent crash in the economy and rising interest rates, rising inflation, it hadn't happened yet. So that's why he's talking in terms of a housing market boom, because that quickly changed.
Right, it's a disconnect we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years between rental levels and mortgage interest rates. And the most important reason why house prices have gone up so much over the last 20 or 30 years is the steady reduction in interest rates. So you've now got a situation where it is actually much cheaper to buy a property than to rent, providing you can find a deposit.
Yep.
So for those people who are renting, one solution which would help them would be if we brought back 100% mortgages. Now, I know some people will say, that's not a good idea, but the basic point about a mortgage is, can you afford it? And whether you borrow 95 or 100% is less important than whether it's affordable. So if you can demonstrate you can afford rent, it's fairly obvious that you can actually afford the mortgage payments as well. So that's one solution.
Yeah.
But I think because interest rates are such a critical part of this factor, the biggest risk to house prices is that we see a sharp rise in interest rate.
So he's just alluded to it before I got a chance to say it. Imagine if you had a 100% mortgage as opposed to a 90 or 85%, and then you go from interest rates, which at that time were around about 2% to 6%. Okay? The whole catastrophe of the 2008 housing market crash was the fact that people were borrowing at 100%, 110%. Interest rates did that, and people were screwed, for want of a better word. He's talking about bringing that back, the same scenario. I know he did say that affordability is key, but even when affordability is met, you still can't foresee what happened 6 months after this video was made, which was a terrible, catastrophic announcement by the then Prime Minister and Chancellor, which caused interest rates to effectively triple over the next 6 to 12 months. And we have a housing market crisis, as it's being called right now. So I don't agree with him at all.
And that clearly doesn't look likely in the short term, but I would highlight that as...
That's hilarious. He literally just said an interest rate hike doesn't look likely in the short term, and it happened. It happened. It happened less than 6 months after this video was made.
Being the biggest risk.
Okay, let's just go back to the fundamentals before I bring you in, Bob. I've got a couple of graphics here. Because the reality is, I cited the figures roughly in my opening. Let's look at them in more detail. If you look at house building over recent decades, you can see that in the last time we were building 250,000 homes a year was back in the 1970s. There 2.5 million in the decade as a whole. And since then, house building has absolutely plummeted. The 25 to 34-year-olds, they're the crucial family forming age, from over 60% home ownership in 1991 down to just 40%. And they're the latest numbers I can get hold of, and I'm pretty good at this data mining stuff. It's not you, I know, but so many MPs, the advice they're given is if it's planning related, you're against it. That's like a kind of survival guide to remaining in the House of Commons.
Well, I mean, for almost all greenfield sites, I will oppose on principle because they're not built for young islanders, and they're not really built for islanders either because they're car dependent. They're on greenfield sites. They damage us in lots of different ways. If the government there are three principles here that the planning bill should have. Well, I fear it's just going to be more of the same developer-led stuff, which Rose very eloquently opposes. But if we can get a plan, a local input, so a community-led, if we can make it environmentally sustainable, because we all know that detached houses are the most climate change unfriendly, most unsustainable form of housing, and they're car dependent. And if we can get it levelling up later, the government is big about creating jobs up north. You're not going to have the drain of people moving from city to suburb and from north to south that has marked the last half century. We've increased population on the island by 50%. Liverpool, it's declined, not relatively, absolutely by...
He's talking about population, like, get to the housing part, like, how do we build more homes?
30%. And in Blackpool and Hull, and Birmingham and Manchester and about between half a dozen and a dozen great northern cities, you've had an absolute decline in population, and we need to re-energise other parts of the UK and drive housing there so it is really much cheaper. So actually it's an attraction not to head south but to head north. And places like the island, and clearly I'm speaking selfishly as a constituency MP, we need to have the right to look after our own. One final point, Liam, and then I'll be quiet. In the next 15 years, our own population on the island is actually due to decline by about 10,000, give or take. So actually, we don't need more housing. Clearly, we're going to build some.
So, I mean, basically, from what I can hear him say is that the answer to getting more homes built is to encourage people to stay in their own towns and cities. So he's talking about a drain from north to south, you know, basically from these cities where there are less opportunities down towards London. I don't know how getting those people to stay there solves the issue of more homes getting built. You're just shifting the problem somewhere else in the UK. Am I missing something here, or has he not addressed the question?
Actually, what we need is to be able to look after young people and build in our town centres, to revive our town centres in much more modest numbers than the government wants. There are 1 million outstanding permissions on the Isle of Wight, over 2,500, for example, and yet the Isle of Wight Council gets clobbered and criticised by government if we give permissions that then get land banked. We get the blame, and developers can then raid our green fields because they're sitting on the permissions rather than building them. So it's an unfair system which is way too developer friendly and does not force developers to build the houses they've got permission to build. And I'm really hoping that a series of amendments it's going to come in the planning bill.
I think he's just really in the politics here. He's talking about developers sitting on planning. He's focused a lot on planning permission, which I get is a key part of building houses. You need the planning permission, but surely a way around it is to take the onus off of developers, so we're not reliant on developers building what we need and the government taking it forward. So seems to be a bit of political brinkmanship. He's focusing on the politics. He hasn't answered the question of how you build more homes in the UK. And I think the reason is because there isn't the money to do it, right? There isn't the money to build the houses that we need in the UK for the population who need them. So what is the solution? I am coming at this from left field. I am an economist. I studied economics at uni. I think the core is to develop the actual economy and productivity of the UK. I get that we've been in various crises over the last few decades. We had 2008, we had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had the recent cost of living crisis. So it's hard. You know, the government have an unenviable task on their hands. But alongside the policies like quantitative easing, etc., the government really need to focus on making the economy more productive. The more productive the economy is, the more our GDP will be, the more people's wages will be, the more taxes that the government will be able to collect will be, and they'll have the money to build houses. Now, I know that's a really, really simplified view of it. I am really distilling it down to the basics, but we can't go on like this. We can't keep money printing our way out of economic catastrophes. Eventually, this money has to be paid back. And as soon as an economic crisis hit, as soon as interest rates goes up or the cost of living increases, people in Britain are really seeing the truth of how not well off we really are. We have this mindset that this is still Great Britain, super prosperous. I'm not saying we're not prosperous, but we are not as well off as a country as we think we are. It's only going to take a few more economic crashes, economic hits, for people to be really brought to their knees in a way that they didn't think would be possible in Britain. And I'll land my plane there, guys. Thanks as always for supporting the channel. Please like, subscribe, and share this channel, this video with people you think might enjoy it. That's how channels like this grow. And I'll see you guys on the next one.